This morning, my mother-in-law grumbled about the soup I served for breakfast. Why is this so bland? It's watery and it's just not good, she complained. Make it richer, will you? I calmly replied, but the doctor told you to watch your salt intake.
Who cares about that?
I like bold, rich flavors, she shot back. My mother-in-law, or MIL for short, is always complaining about the food I cook. She's obsessed with heavily seasoned meals, yet she's overweight and borderline diabetic. Her doctor has warned her multiple times to avoid salt and watch what she eats, but she doesn't seem to care. No matter how much effort I put into preparing low-sodium dishes, she always adds more seasoning to her plate, completely ignoring the doctor's advice. This morning was no different. She dumped a ridiculous amount of salt and pepper into the soup I had carefully made. I couldn't believe it. I had gone out of my way to use low-sodium ingredients, and yet she acted like it was still lacking. Honestly, I sometimes worry that she's going to cause serious harm to herself with the way she eats. If she keeps this up, she might face some serious health consequences, but to tell you the truth, I wouldn't exactly be heartbroken if she did. Emile seems to enjoy making my life difficult. It feels like all she does is criticize and show her dislike toward me. By the way, my name is Lauren. I'm 31, and while I work, I also take care of the house. I've been married to my husband for 4 years. We don't have any children, though. The reason? My infertility. Unfortunately, Emile never lets me forget it. She constantly throws hurtful comments my way. You're worthless as a woman if you can't have children, she sneers. You're defective. You should be thankful you're even allowed to stay in this house. Her words hit me hard every time. I don't know how to respond to such cruelty. I guess you're right. I must be defective since I can't have kids, I mutter, feeling broken inside. We've tried so many times, and each attempt has ended in disappointment. Life can feel really unfair sometimes. To make things worse, my husband usually agrees with her. He even laughs along with Emile's harsh comments. Well, she's got a point, he says with a grin, as if this is all just some sort of joke. I can't believe it. How can he be so insensitive? I want to have a baby more than anything. I've been seeing an obstetrician, trying everything possible while managing my job and household, but nothing has worked. It's exhausting, both physically and emotionally, and I've finally reached the point where I can't take it anymore. I've decided to stop the treatments. They're draining in every way, and they cost a fortune. It's hard to keep spending money on something that feels so hopeless. What makes it worse is that my husband used to say the treatments were a waste of money. Yet, at the same time, he constantly pressured me to get pregnant. Why aren't you pregnant yet? What's taking so long? He'd ask, as if I wasn't trying my hardest. How could I possibly make it happen any faster? If it were that simple, I wouldn't be going through all of this. I thought that maybe, just maybe, stopping the treatments would ease some of the pressure, but the tension in our home still lingers. I once entertained the idea that maybe, just maybe, my husband and I could live happily ever after, just the two of us. No kids, just us. But that dream felt impossible with my mother-in-law still clinging to her hope of having a grandchild. She wouldn't let go of it no matter what. One day, she came prancing into the living room, holding a pack of diapers with a smirk on her face. Look, I bought diapers, she announced, waving them in my direction. I blinked, caught off guard by the sight of them. Excuse me? I said, trying to mask my confusion. You'll need them eventually, she chirped, clearly enjoying herself. I couldn't help but feel a little irritated. Aren't those a bit small for you? I asked, pretending to miss the point. Very funny. These are for a baby, obviously. Can't you see that? She shot back, laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. Well, I wouldn't know, I muttered, unable to hide the bitterness creeping into my voice. I'm just the defective woman who can't have children, remember? Her laughter stopped for a moment, and then she shrugged. That's enough, she said, her mood souring. Frustrated, she stormed off to her room, leaving me standing there, exhausted and drained. After working all day, I didn't have the energy to deal with her snide remarks and never-ending jabs. I let out a quiet sigh of relief as she disappeared. I was just too tired to keep putting up with her nonsense. Some days it felt like making my life miserable was her full-time job. The truth is, My husband and I had moved in with her after my father-in-law passed away about a year ago. She was devastated at the time, and understandably so. Around that same time, her doctor had warned her that she was at high risk for developing diabetes. My husband, being the kind-hearted person he is, insisted we move in to help her cope and take care of her. He wanted to be there for his mom, especially with her health at risk. But honestly, she wasn't as fragile as she let on. As long as she took her medication and followed a decent diet, she was fine. There wasn't much to worry about except for the fact that she didn't actually follow the doctor's orders. She often neglected her medication and ate whatever junk food she felt like. At this rate, her condition was bound to worsen sooner or later. And when that happened, I had no intention of being the one stuck taking care of her. I mean, I'm still in my 20s, working hard, juggling a career and household responsibilities. The last thing I want is to spend my youth caring for my in-laws. No, thank you. The next day was my day off, and I was busy doing chores around the house. Normally, my mother-in-law just lounges around, snacking on the couch while I work, but today was different. Out of nowhere, she stood up and walked straight into my room. I watched her go, too occupied with laundry to stop her. A few minutes later, she came out and proudly announced, "I cleaned your room for you." I forced a smile. "Oh, thank you," I said, but something didn't feel right. There was a strange vibe in the air. Why would she clean my room? She never does anything like that. Was she trying to be helpful, or was there something more to it? As I folded clothes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fishy was going on. "I should switch rooms with my husband," she suddenly suggested, out of nowhere.
What?
"Why?" I asked, caught off guard by her comment. She smirked. "Well, if you keep leaving your room in such a mess, you're bound to get bugs in there. But honestly, it suits you," she added with a laugh. I just nodded along, feeling more confused than ever. "Uh-huh. Sure. Thanks for the clean room," I said, playing along, though her words kept nagging at me. As she walked away, she seemed pleased with herself, like she'd done me some huge favor. I wasn't fooled. Her sudden interest in cleaning my space was suspicious. What was she up to? That night, I decided to sleep in my husband's room. He had been away on a business trip since the day before, so he wouldn't know. And even if he did find out, I knew he wouldn't get mad. Our relationship had cooled off in recent months, anyway. We kept separate bedrooms, partly because I worked regular hours as a nurse and partly because we needed our space. I didn't want to disturb him when he came home late, and to be honest, our marriage wasn't what it used to be. Still, I had a gut feeling that something was off with my mother-in-law. Whether she was trying to snoop or make a point, I wasn't about to let her get under my skin. When I work the night shift, I usually wait until my mother-in-law, or Emile as I call her, goes to her room before heading to my husband's bedroom to sleep. Once I'm sure she's settled, I think to myself, all right, she's in her room. Time for me to get some rest, and then I quietly slip into my husband's room. For 5 days, I slept there without any problems, but it didn't take long for Emile to get suspicious. She must have noticed I seemed too cheerful for her liking, and suddenly, she began asking strange questions. "Don't you feel any pain or discomfort?" she asked out of nowhere. "Huh? What do you mean?" I replied, genuinely confused. "Oh, never mind," she said, quickly brushing off the question. It was odd, to say the least. I couldn't help but wonder if she was suspecting something or trying to hint at something. She avoided eye contact after that and ate her meal alone in silence. That same day, I had the night shift at the hospital, so I planned to take it easy at home before heading out for work. Unfortunately, relaxation is a luxury I rarely enjoy. My Emile never lifts a finger to help around the house. She prefers to boss me around, giving orders from her favorite spot on the couch, where she lounges all day, snacking and reading Italian comics aimed at women. As I passed by her, I caught a glimpse of the cover of her comic book. The English translation was terrible, as usual, and the title was something like Epic Mother and Daughter-in-Law Swamp Battle. I rolled my eyes at her choice of reading material. Of course, she'd be interested in stories about toxic mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationships. It seemed like her personal guidebook for making my life more difficult. Hours later, My husband finally returned from his business trip, but it was already 9 p.m. He looked exhausted as he dropped his bags by the door. Ugh, I'm beat. I'm going to hop in the bath, he said, heading straight to the bathroom. Sure, I'll heat it up for you. Grab a beer in the meantime, I offered, trying to be helpful. Thanks. I think I'll do that, he replied, but as I turned to leave, I suddenly remembered something. Wait, I called out, stopping him in his tracks. It's not safe to drink alcohol before a bath, you know. He sighed, looking disappointed. Fine. I'll settle for a non-alcoholic beer then. Reluctantly, he grabbed a non-alcoholic beer from the fridge. I warned him because, despite how obvious it might seem, mixing booze with hot water can be dangerous. You'd think he'd know better after all. Even the public baths have signs warning people not to enter if they're drunk. But common sense isn't so common, not with him, and certainly not with my mother-in-law. After finishing his drink, my husband took his bath, and to my dismay, he began singing loudly. We live in a single-family home, but still, belting out tunes at this hour? It was almost 9:45 p.m. I could already picture our annoyed neighbors glaring at their clocks. Hey, you're too loud. I shouted through the door, hoping he'd get the message. Shut it. You're the one who's being loud, he yelled back, clearly not getting the point. I warned you quietly, so stop singing already. I snapped, growing more frustrated by the minute. Right on cue, Emile chimed in, coming into the bathroom area, like she was part of the argument. James is just trying to enjoy himself by singing. What's your problem? She said, defending him as usual. Seriously? I muttered under my breath. Then, of course, she had to add, you really don't know how to treat your husband, do you? Always inconsiderate and full of complaints. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Hey, I'm not the one constantly complaining, Emile. I shot back, already regretting engaging her. Back talk, huh? You're definitely not cute. Not that you're much of a beauty to begin with, she sneered, clearly trying to get under my skin. That's fine by me. I'm probably a knockout beauty in some other country, I said, brushing off her insult with a smirk. I wasn't about to let her have the last word. She just laughed and wandered off, leaving me alone to finish getting ready for my night shift. Meanwhile, my husband got out of the bath and started drinking again. I glanced at the clock. It was already past 9:45 p.m., and I had to leave for work soon. Even though the hospital isn't far from our home, there's always a lot to do before my shift starts. And dealing with my MIL and husband was just one more thing adding to the weight of the day. As I gathered my things to head out, I sighed, wondering if there would ever be a day when life didn't feel this overwhelming. I need to leave early tonight, I told my husband, grabbing my bag and getting ready for my night shift. Oh, and by the way, I've been sleeping in your room for the past few nights. Would you mind switching rooms and sleeping in mine tonight? My clothes are scattered everywhere, and I didn't have time to clean up. Sure, it doesn't matter to me, he replied casually, not giving it much thought. All right, I'm off then. Take care, I whispered, making sure to speak quietly so my mother-in-law wouldn't overhear. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a loud groan behind me. Startled, I turned around to see my husband curled up on the floor, clutching his leg in pain. James, what happened? I rushed over to him, feeling a wave of panic rising. He couldn't even speak. His face twisted in pain, and he was sweating, groaning in agony. My mother-in-law, or Emile as I call her, went pale, her eyes wide with panic. What's going on? James, speak to me, she cried, her voice shaking. But no matter what I asked, my husband couldn't respond. He just lay there on the floor, clutching his leg and moaning in pain. My heart raced, and I knew I had to act fast. But then something strange caught my attention. The floor felt unusually slippery under my feet. Even though I was wearing socks, it was so slick that I almost lost my balance just standing there. What the heck is going on? Why is the floor so slippery? I blurted out, looking around in confusion. James, are you okay? I asked, but he was in too much pain to answer. I glanced over at my MIL, who stood there frozen, her face pale as a ghost. Mel, what did you do? I snapped, trying to figure out how this had happened. I didn't do anything, she stammered. It's not my fault. blaming her wouldn't help the situation, so I focused on getting help. Without wasting another second, I called an ambulance. My mind was racing, and work was the last thing on my mind now. My husband needed medical attention, and that was all that mattered. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly assessed the situation and rushed him to the hospital, ironically, the same hospital where I work. Throughout the ride, James clutched his leg, wincing in pain. His face was drenched in sweat, and you could tell he was suffering badly. I held his hand, trying to comfort him. "Hang in there," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if he could even hear me over the pain. When we got to the hospital, a doctor immediately examined him. After some tests and x-rays, the doctor gave us the diagnosis. It was a fifth metatarsal fracture. My husband had broken a bone in his foot, most likely from slipping on the slick floor. His foot was swollen and bruised, and the pain had been unbearable. The doctor explained that this type of fracture often happens when someone twists their ankle or puts too much weight on their foot while falling. Hearing this, my mind flashed back to when I had twisted my own ankle years ago while walking down the stairs. I was lost in the music coming through my headphones, not paying attention to where I was stepping. I heard a loud snap, followed by an excruciating pain that nearly made me collapse. I ended up with the same kind of fracture my husband had now, a fifth metatarsal fracture. The memory made me wince in sympathy for what he was going through. Thankfully, my husband's injury didn't require surgery or hospitalization, so after they bandaged him up and gave him some pain medication, he was allowed to come home. I was supposed to work the night shift that day, but my nursing supervisor insisted I take the night off to care for my husband. She was genuinely concerned, telling me, "It's not a life-threatening situation, but you should be with him." I appreciated her understanding. When we got back home, James was still in pain and looked pale. "I feel awful. I think I've got a fever," he groaned. "Well, you did break your leg," I said gently. It's not unusual to feel feverish after something like that. But what I really want to know is why the floor was so slippery in the first place. What happened? I couldn't shake the suspicion that my MIL had something to do with it. She was acting way too nervous, and her behavior didn't sit right with me. "Why don't we ask Mill about that, huh?" I said, looking in her direction. She was standing off to the side, avoiding eye contact. "Hey, what did you do to the floor in the room?" I asked, my tone firm. MIL hesitated for a moment, then finally spoke up. Well, the floor was a little slippery, but I didn't mean for him to get hurt. "I greased the floor," she admitted, stumbling over her words. I stared at her, stunned. "What do you mean you greased the floor? Why would you do something like that?" "Well, that room is supposed to be for my daughter-in-law," she mumbled, looking away. "I didn't think anyone else would be in there." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had deliberately made the floor slippery to mess with me, and my husband had paid the price. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. As much as I wanted to scream at her, I knew there was no point. What was done was done. "Next time, think before you act, MIL," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You could have seriously hurt someone." I was hoping my daughter-in-law would slip, so I put a lot of grease on the floor. "I didn't expect you to go in there and fall," my mother-in-law admitted. I couldn't believe it. It turns out she had purposely made the floor slippery, planning for me to fall. She pretended to clean the room, but her real intention was to put me in danger. I was furious. If I had walked into that room, I could have seriously hurt myself. Breaking a leg would have been the least of my worries. What if I had hit my head? That could have been fatal. What she did was beyond reckless. It was dangerous and criminal. "You're despicable," I snapped. "You're not even family to me anymore. I got hurt because of you. I'm calling the police." "Wait a minute. I didn't directly hurt anyone, did I?" she stammered, trying to defend herself. "Your wife told you to go in there, didn't she? So it's her fault, not mine." "Shut up. That's not the point," my husband shouted, dialing the police with fury in his eyes. My mother-in-law tried to grab the phone from him, but even with his broken leg, my husband was stronger. He held onto his phone and continued speaking to the police. As I watched the chaos unfold, I couldn't help but think, I'd rather be at work, even dealing with the stress of the hospital, than this mess. Our neighbors were bound to find out about this awful situation soon. I started thinking that maybe I should call the police too. After all, she almost hurt me as well. You know, I said, this could be considered attempted harm. You might be charged.
No.
I don't want to be taken to the police, she cried, panic spreading across her face. Really? You knew what could happen when you did this, I said, my voice calm but firm. Or did you think you could just get rid of me without any consequences? She hesitated before admitting, well, I did think it might be better if you just disappeared. My heart sank. Wow, you're the worst. Your way of thinking is criminal. Honestly, I wish you'd just stay in jail forever. I turned to my husband. Let's get a divorce.
What?
Over this? He asked, shocked. Yes, over this. You've looked down on me, called me defective, and you have no idea how much that hurt. I can't live with that anymore. I can live without you just fine. No, please don't say that. I need you, he pleaded. I was counting on your income. I even got a new car contract.
What?
I asked, feeling a mix of disbelief and anger. I finally got the Toyota Century I've always wanted from Italy, he said, almost sheepishly. I don't care anymore, I replied firmly. I quickly cleaned the greasy floor, then grabbed a bag and started packing my belongings. I took off my wedding ring and placed it on the table. As I rummaged through a shelf filled with dishes, I remembered something. The divorce papers. I found them, the ones he had written a while ago, just in case. We had agreed that if I couldn't have a child within 3 years, we'd get divorced. Well, I can't have children now, so let's end this, I told him. You must be feeling relieved. Wait, what about the loan for my car? He asked, looking worried. Who cares? I said, not interested in his problems anymore. I left the house and headed straight to the hospital. When I arrived, the head nurse, who was always kind, didn't ask questions. She seemed to understand that I had my reasons for showing up like that. As a nurse, I knew I could support myself. I didn't need a husband. I started wondering why I had stayed in that awful house, being treated like a servant by my in-laws and putting up with their rude comments. It all seemed so ridiculous now. I made up my mind to focus on my job and leave that part of my life behind. The next morning, I filed for divorce. My now ex-husband had caused me so much emotional pain that I consulted a lawyer about getting compensation. In the end, he had to pay me, and I couldn't help but think, serves you right. Since the police got involved, our neighbors started avoiding my mother-in-law. She had told them the story of how my ex-husband broke his leg, and now everyone thought she was a terrible person. It didn't take long before my ex-husband wanted nothing to do with her anymore, and it seems he kicked her out. She's been crying ever since, saying she can't live on her own. She receives some kind of survivor's benefits, but it's not much. Given how much she used to eat, our grocery bills were always outrageous. Now, she'd have to live a very modest life. As for my ex-husband, I don't care what happens to him anymore. He had mentioned something about a car loan, but I have no idea how that turned out. I assumed he wouldn't be able to afford it on his salary. He always took me for granted, thinking I would help pay for everything. It annoyed me so much. Even though he wasn't wealthy, he still went ahead and bought a new car without thinking. Later on, I started dating a doctor I met at the hospital. For years after that, we got married, and to our surprise, we were blessed with a child. It felt like a miracle after everything I had been through. Now, I'm focused on doing my best for my new family, and I couldn't be happier.